Jacob Wilson sat on the gray couch in the living room of their home outside Portland, clutching a framed photograph of Lily. His daughter, who was just 19, had died 4 days earlier in a car accident. In the picture, Lily was smiling, her brown hair hanging around her shoulders, her eyes sparkling. The light from the window reflected off the glass of the frame, making her face seem alive, as if she were about to walk into the room. Jacob couldn't look away. On the wooden coffee table in front of him was his phone, its screen flickering with missed calls and messages. Coworkers, friends, even his neighbor Marge had all tried to contact him, but he hadn't answered any of them. The silence in the living room was broken only by the occasional chime of a notification, which he swiped away without reading. The clink of dishes in the kitchen. Emily, his wife, was making coffee. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the house, but Jacob didn't move. He heard Emily open the cabinet, take out a ceramic mug, pour coffee from the coffee maker. Her movements were quick, almost mechanical. She was getting ready for work, teaching history at a high school. Jacob didn't understand how she could think about work after what had happened. His fingers tightened around the frame, his knuckles white. He looked at Lily, and one question swirled in his head: how to live. Emily walked into the living room holding a white mug with a blue pattern. She was wearing a dark blue blouse, black pants, and her hair was pulled back into a neat bun. She paused in the doorway, looking at Jacob. He didn't look up, continuing to stare at the photograph. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but there was a hint of fatigue and a slight hoarseness to it. "No," Jacob answered briefly, without looking up from the photo. Emily stepped forward, setting her mug on the table next to Jacob's phone. She sat down in the beige chair across from him, her work bag already by the door. Emily glanced at her husband's phone, and the screen flickered again, showing the name Dan and a missed call. "Dan called you," she said. "From the office. I heard you hang up." "Let him call," Jacob muttered, his voice muffled. "Jacob, you can't just—" Emily paused, searching for words. "People care about you, about us." "I don't care," he said, finally looking up. His eyes were bloodshot, with dark circles under them, and stubble covering his cheeks. "You understand that, Emily? I don't care who's worried." Emily pressed her lips together, her fingers tightening around the handle of her mug. She took a small sip, then set the coffee back down on the table. "I understand," she said quietly, "but I can't sit at home all day and keep quiet. I need to do something." "Do something?" Jacob sat up straight, his voice rising. He placed the frame on the couch next to him, as if he were afraid to drop it. "Our daughter died, Emily, 4 days ago, and you're going to school like nothing happened." "Don't say that," she snapped. Her eyes narrowed, her voice trembling. "Do you think this is easy for me? Do you think I don't feel it? I can't just sit here and look at pictures of her, Jacob. It'll kill me." "It would kill me to pretend everything was okay," he said. He ran a hand through his hair, his fingers shaking. "How can you go to class, teach the kids, talk to them like Lily, like she wasn't there?" "I'm not pretending it wasn't there," Emily said. She looked away at the curtains, which were fluttering slightly in the draft. "I'm just doing my job. That's all I have. If I stay home, I'll go crazy." Jacob shook his head, his face contorted in pain. "It's not right," he said. "You can't just go on living." "What are you suggesting?" Emily turned to him, her voice sharper. "Sit here and say nothing. Ignore the world. It won't bring her back, Jacob. It won't bring anything back." He opened his mouth to reply, but the words stuck. His gaze went back to the photograph on the couch. Lily was standing in the park, wearing a denim jacket, her smile so wide she looked like she was about to laugh. Jacob remembered walking there last summer. Lily was talking about her plans for college, how she wanted to study biology. Her voice was in his head now, but he couldn't respond. Emily stood up, picked up her mug, but didn't move away. She looked at Jacob, her shoulders tense. "I need to get ready," she said. "Classes start in an hour." "Are you serious?" Jacob looked at her, his voice full of disbelief. You're just going to leave? Like that? What should I do? Emily stepped closer, her eyes shining with the tears she was holding back. Call the principal and tell him I'm not coming. They'll find someone to replace me for a day, maybe two. And then I have to work, Jacob. We have to pay for the house, the car, everything. Life doesn't stop, even when it hurts. It stopped for me, he said quietly, almost in a whisper. His hands were on his knees, his fingers clasped. Emily froze. She looked at him, her face softened, but there was a mixture of pain and irritation in her eyes. I know, she said. I see you sitting here, holding that picture, but I can't do it like you do. I've tried. I sat in her room yesterday, looking at her books, her clothes. I couldn't breathe, Jacob. I have to move or I'll break. And I'm already broken, he said. He picked up the frame again, his fingers tentatively touching the glass. I don't understand you, Emily. I don't understand how you can get up, get dressed, and leave. And I don't understand how you can sit here and do nothing, she replied. Her voice wavered, and she took a deep breath to calm herself. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying I don't think about her every second. But I have to move forward, at least this way. That's not forward, Jacob said. That's running. Emily looked at him, her lips pressed into a thin line. She wanted to answer, but instead she turned and walked into the hallway. Jacob heard her grab her bag, the jingle of her car keys. She stopped at the door, her footsteps fading. If you need to talk, I'm here, she said without turning around. But I can't cancel class, not today. I don't need to talk, Jacob said. His voice was cold. I need her to be alive. Emily didn't answer. The door slammed shut and the house went silent. Jacob sat on the couch, holding the photo. His phone blinked a message from a colleague. Jacob, call me if anything happens. He swiped the notification away without reading it. Emily's words about life not stopping echoed in his head, but he couldn't accept them. For him, it all ended the moment the police called and said Lily was gone. He stood up and went to the window. Outside, a neighbor was watering the lawn, the water glistening in the sun. A car passed by, followed by another. The world went on, but Jacob felt like a stranger in it. He returned to the couch, sat down, and picked up the frame again. Lily was looking at him from the photograph, and he tried to remember her voice, her laughter. But the silence in the house drowned everything out, and he was left alone with her motionless face in the picture. Jacob Wilson drove down Highway 26 in his old blue pickup, his hands tight on the steering wheel. It was a gray morning, overcast, and a light rain pattered against his windshield. The windshield wipers squealed as they moved back and forth. He was heading toward the spot where his daughter, Lily, had died 4 days earlier. He needed to see it for himself: tire tracks, debris, anything that would explain why she was gone. The radio in the car was off, and the only sound was the sound of tires on wet pavement and the occasional patter of rain. Jacob didn't want any distractions. His mind was on Lily. He remembered the morning of the day it had happened. Lily had walked into the kitchen while he was drinking coffee and checking work emails on his laptop. She was wearing her favorite denim jacket, her hair pulled back into a messy ponytail. "Dad, I'm going to Sarah's," she said, grabbing an apple from the bowl on the table. "I'll be back for dinner." "Okay," he replied, without looking up from the screen. "Drive carefully." She smiled, waved, and ran out the door. Jacob didn't know it then, but that was the last time they spoke. He kept working, answering text messages until the police called. Now those words, "drive carefully," sounded like a taunt in his head. Why hadn't he looked at her? Why hadn't he asked how she was doing? He gritted his teeth, his fingers tightening on the steering wheel. Highway 26 wound through a pine forest, the road narrow and twisting. Jacob knew the area. He and Lily had driven here dozens of times, driving her to volleyball practice or visiting friends. He noticed a sign indicating the mile to the intersection where the accident had occurred. His heart began to beat faster. He slowed down, scanning the side of the road. The rain had gotten heavier, and the wipers were working faster, but visibility was still poor. Finally, he saw it, the spot marked by tire tracks on the asphalt. Jacob pulled over, turned off the engine, and got out. The cold rain immediately soaked his jacket and hair, but he ignored it. He walked to the edge of the road, where the tire tracks turned sharply to the side. The asphalt was scratched, and here and there small shards of glass were visible, glistening in the rain. Nearby, in the grass, lay a piece of plastic part of a bumper, from the looks of it. Jacob crouched down, examining the tracks. They were deep, black, as if Lily's car had tried to brake sharply. "What were you doing here, Lily?" he muttered under his breath. His voice was shaking. "Why so fast?" He remembered how much she loved driving. Lily always had her music blasting loudly, humming along to her playlists. One day, a year ago, they were driving down this same highway together, and she had convinced him to sing a song from her favorite band with her. "Dad, come on," she laughed, drumming her fingers on the steering wheel. "You know the words." "I'm too old for this," he grumbled, but he sang along anyway, messing up the lyrics. Lily laughed, her laughter filling the car. Now, standing on the side of the road, Jacob closed his eyes, trying to hold the sound in his mind. But the rain and the silence drowned it out. He opened his eyes and looked at the tracks again. They led to a tree by the side of the road, where the bark was slightly damaged. He walked closer, ran his hand along the trunk. This was where her car had stopped. This was where her life had ended. His fingers trembled, and he pulled his hand away. "I should have been with you," he said quietly. "I should have." He remembered sitting in the office that day, going through reports. Lily had called him that afternoon, but he'd been busy and hung up, deciding to call back later. Later never came. Jacob clenched his fists, feeling the guilt in his chest. If he'd answered, if he'd asked where she was going, maybe things would have been different. He turned away from the tree and started back toward the car, but stopped when he noticed something in the grass. It was a small metal star-shaped keychain, like the one on Lily's keys. Jacob picked it up, brushed the dirt off it. His throat tightened. He stuffed the keychain in his pocket and walked back to the truck. The house was quiet, just like it had been that morning when Emily had left for work. Jacob dropped his keys on the hallway table and walked into the living room. Lily's picture was still on the couch where he had left it. He picked up the frame and sat down, looking at her face. He needed to do something to stop himself from thinking, but he didn't know what. He stood up, deciding to go into Lily's room. The door creaked as he opened it. The scent of her perfume was there, a light floral scent. Her blue blanket was on the bed, folded neatly. There were books on the table, a laptop, and a couple of pencils. It looked like she was about to return. Jacob walked up to the table, running his hand over the spines of the books. His gaze fell on a notebook with a bright cover. Lily liked to write down her thoughts, to-do lists, sometimes jokes. He opened it, leafing through the pages. There was her handwriting, neat, with little curls on the letters. A shopping list, a note about meeting a friend, a sketch of some drawing. And then he saw the page where it was written, "Daddy, be careful." Jacob froze. The note was dated the day before the accident. He reread the words, trying to figure out what she meant. Was it a warning? A request? His fingers tightened around the pad, his heart pounding. He remembered how she sometimes left notes on the refrigerator for him: "Buy milk," or "Don't forget my match." But this was different. It sounded serious, almost like a farewell. "Lily, what did you want to say?" he whispered. He sat on her bed, holding his notebook. The guilt that was already weighing on him became unbearable. He should have been home, talking to her, not sitting in his office. He remembered how she had once, back in high school, come to him after a fight with a friend. "Dad, why is everything so complicated?" she asked, sitting on the sofa with a mug of tea. "Because people are always difficult," he replied. "But you're strong, you can handle it." She smiled then, hugged him. Now he thought that he had not been strong enough for her. He had not protected her. Jacob closed the notebook, but the words, "Daddy, be careful," continued to sound in his head. He put the notebook on the table, stood up and left the room, closing the door. Emily Wilson stood in front of her high school class, chalk in hand. The title on the board read, The American Civil War, Causes and Consequences. The students sat at their desks, some leafing through their textbooks, others whispering. Morning light streamed through the school's large windows, illuminating the wooden floors. Emily was about to begin class, but her mind was elsewhere. 4 days ago, her daughter, Lily, died in a car accident. She was only 19. Emily gripped the chalk tighter, trying to concentrate. So, she began, her voice quieter than usual. Today, we're going to discuss the economic factors that led to the war. Who can name one of them? Several hands went up. Emily nodded to a girl in the front row. Slavery, the student said. The South depended on it for its cotton plantations. Right, Emily said, but her eyes were unfocused. She remembered Lily sitting at the kitchen table, studying for her history exam. Mom, this is so boring, Lily grumbled, leafing through her textbook. Why do I need to know about all these old wars? Because history teaches us to understand why things happen, Emily replied then, smiling. And don't roll your eyes, I see it. Lily laughed, her laugh ringing like a bell. The sound echoed in Emily's head now, and she paused, looking at the class. The students noticed her pause, and someone cleared their throats. Emily blinked, snapping back to reality. Okay, she said. Let's turn to page 123. Read the first paragraph and think about how the economy of the North differed from that of the South. She turned back to the board, pretending to write, but her hand was shaking. She had to hold on, if only for the lesson. Her work was her anchor, the only thing that kept her from drowning in grief. But every minute in class was a reminder of Lily, her questions, her jokes, her life. Emily gritted her teeth and kept writing, but thoughts of her daughter wouldn't leave her. When the bell rang to end class, Emily felt a sense of relief. Students began to pack up, their voices filling the room. She gathered her notes, trying not to look at the empty desk in the corner where Lily would have sat if she had chosen her subject. Emily walked out into the hallway, heading to the staff room. She needed 5 minutes of silence to compose herself before her next class. The staff room smelled of coffee and paper. Several teachers were sitting at a table, checking notebooks or discussing schedules. Emily poured herself a glass of water from the cooler and sat in a corner, away from the others. She pulled out her phone to check the time, but her eyes fell on the screensaver, a photo of Lily on the beach, with wet hair and a wide smile. Emily quickly locked the screen, her throat tightening. She took a sip of water, but it didn't help. Emily? A voice said. She looked up. Matt, the gym teacher, was standing in front of her, holding a mug of coffee. He was about 40, with short dark hair and an athletic build. Are you okay? Yes, she answered, but her voice was too quiet. She cleared her throat. Just tired. Matt sat down opposite her, placing his mug on the table. He looked at her, his gaze soft but attentive. I heard what happened, he said. With Lily, I'm so sorry. Emily nodded, unsure of what to say. She didn't want to talk about Lily, but the silence seemed even worse. Thank you, she said finally. It's hard. I know, Matt said. He paused, looking at his mug. My wife died 2 years ago. Cancer. I still haven't gotten used to her being gone. Emily looked at him. She knew Matt had lost his wife, but they had never talked about it. His words touched something inside her, and she felt like she could be honest. I don't know how to live with this, she admitted. I come here, I teach lessons, but I think about her all the time. It's like I'm pretending. It's not an act, Matt said. You do what you can. Sometimes just getting out of bed is a victory. Emily smiled weakly. His words were simple, but they hurt her. She remembered their argument with Jacob that morning, his accusations that she was running from grief. Maybe Matt was right, and she was just trying to survive. Want to talk? Matt asked. Not here, of course. There's a cafe across the street. I go there after school. I can keep you company if you want. Emily hesitated. She had her next lesson to study for, but the thought of talking to someone who understood was tempting. Jacob didn't want to talk, he just stared at Lily's photos and said nothing. Maybe talking to Matt would help. Okay, she said. After school, but not for long. Deal, Matt said, smiling. He stood up, picked up his mug, and walked back to his desk. Emily sat there, feeling a little relieved. She wasn't sure if she was doing the right thing, but she didn't want to give up. She finished her water and went back to class, trying to focus on her next lesson. But thoughts of Lily continued to haunt her. As she was explaining the Battle of Gettysburg, she remembered Lily once helping her prepare slides for a lesson. "Mom, that's too much text," Lily said, sitting at her laptop. "No one will read it." "It's important," Emily countered. "You have to understand history." "Yes, but make the pictures bigger," Lily laughed, adding a photo of an old map. Emily blinked, pushing the memory away. The students looked at her, waiting for her to continue. She forced herself to speak, but each word was difficult. After school, Emily packed her bag and walked out of the school. The cafe was across the street, with large windows and wooden tables. Matt was already sitting inside, at a table by the window, with a cup of black coffee. Emily walked in and sat down across from him. The smell of freshly baked goods filled the air, but she only ordered tea. "Thank you for coming," she said, looking at her cup. "I didn't think I'd agree." "I'm glad you're here," Matt replied. "Sometimes it's easier to talk than to keep it all inside." Emily nodded. She talked about Lily, how she loved music, how she argued with her about books, how she dreamed of going to college. Matt listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. He talked about his wife, how they had planned a trip that never happened. The conversation was easy, without pressure, and Emily felt the heaviness in her chest ease a little. "Jacob doesn't want to talk," she admitted, stirring her tea. "He sits at home, looking at her pictures. I don't know how to get through to him." "Everyone has their own path," Matt said. "My sister said I went back to work too quickly, but I needed to move on." "So do I," Emily said, "but he thinks I'm running away." "You're not running away," Matt said. "You're coping. Those are two different things." Emily looked at him, her eyes shining. She wanted to believe him. The conversation lasted about an hour, and when she stood up to leave, she felt a little better. "See you again?" Matt asked as they left the cafe. "Maybe," Emily said. "Thanks, Matt." At home, she didn't tell Jacob about the cafe. She walked into the living room where he was sitting with Lily's photo and felt a pang of guilt. Talking to Matt had helped, but she knew Jacob wouldn't understand. She went into the kitchen, put her bag down, and started making dinner, trying not to think about what she'd kept secret. The guilt was mixed with relief, and she didn't know how to live with it. Jacob Wilson sat at the kitchen table in his suburban Portland home. Jacob couldn't sit idle, he needed to know what had happened. He opened his contacts, found the number for Lieutenant Coulter, the cop who had called him the day of the accident. His fingers hovered over the screen, but he pressed call. The phone buzzed, and Jacob lifted it to his ear, his heart pounding in his chest. "Police Department, Lieutenant Coulter," came the voice on the other end. It was calm, professional, with a slight rasp to it. "This is Jacob Wilson," Jacob said, his voice shaking. "Lily Wilson's father. You called me about the accident." "Yes, Mr. Wilson," Coulter replied, his tone softening. "I remember. How can I help you?" Jacob swallowed, trying to compose himself. He pushed the mug away so as not to knock it over. "I need details," he said. "What happened? I want to know everything. Why is she gone?" Coulter paused, and Jacob heard him flipping through papers, the rustling of pages loud in the quiet of the kitchen. "Okay," Coulter said. "I can tell you what we have in the report. But are you sure you want to do that now? This could be tough." "I'm sure," Jacob answered sharply. "Tell me." Coulter sighed, then began to speak. "The accident happened on Highway 26 around 5 p.m. Your daughter drove from a side road onto a main road. She must have been going too fast. The road was slippery from the rain, and she didn't have time to brake. The truck was on the main road, and the collision was inevitable." Jacob closed his eyes, his fingers tightening around his phone. He imagined Lily behind the wheel of her little blue car, turning onto the highway without noticing the truck. He remembered teaching her to drive 2 years ago. "Keep your eyes peeled, Lily," he said from the passenger seat. "Always check twice at intersections." "Dad, I know," she replied, rolling her eyes but smiling. "Don't worry." Now her smile came back to him, and Jacob felt his throat tighten. He forced himself to speak. "Did she try to do something?" he asked. "Like, to avoid an accident?" "Yeah," Coulter said. "The tire tracks show she tried to swerve. But at that speed and on a wet road, she didn't have a chance. It all happened in seconds." Jacob opened his eyes, staring at the table. Seconds. His daughter had lost her life in seconds while he sat in his office sorting through reports. He remembered missing her call that day. If he had answered, maybe she wouldn't have come. Maybe things would have been different. "What about the truck?" he asked. "The driver, did he do anything?" "The truck driver gave a statement," Coulter said. "He was driving within the speed limit, tried to brake when he saw her car. But the distance was too short. We checked he did not break the rules." Jacob nodded, even though Coulter couldn't see him. He wanted to scream, to blame someone, but Coulter's words made sense. He didn't know what was worse, knowing no one was to blame or finding someone to blame. "What else?" he asked. "Is there anything else?" "Those are the basics," Coulter said. "We have footage from the intersection camera, but it doesn't add anything new. You can come down to the station and look at the report if you want. But honestly, there's nothing in there that's going to ease the pain." "I'm not looking for relief," Jacob said. "I want the truth." "I understand," Coulter replied. "If you have any questions, call me. And I'm so sorry, Mr. Wilson." "Thanks," Jacob muttered and ended the call. He set the phone down on the table, his hands shaking. The silence of the kitchen fell upon him, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. He looked at his coffee, but couldn't bring himself to pick it up. Coulter's words swirled around in his head. Too fast, slippery slope, never had a chance. He tried to piece them together, but all he could see was Lily's face. Jacob stood up, walked into the living room, and picked up the picture of Lily from the couch. She was smiling in the picture, standing in the park in her denim jacket. He sat up, holding the frame, and tried to remember her voice. But all he heard were Coulter's words. He had to do something to keep from drowning in these thoughts. He remembered Lily's note he'd found yesterday. "Daddy, be careful." It was in her notebook, and he still didn't understand what it meant. But now, after talking to Coulter, he felt like he had to piece together all the facts like a puzzle to figure out what had happened. He went back into the kitchen, opened a drawer, and pulled out an old legal pad he used for work notes. His pen was nearby. Jacob sat down, opened a blank page, and began writing. October 5th, Route 26, around 5 p.m. Lily pulled onto the main road. Speeding too high, rain, slick roads. He wrote down everything Coulter had said, trying to be precise. His handwriting was uneven, the letters shaking, but he continued. Truck. Driver not at fault. Lily tried to swerve. Each word hit him like a blow, but he didn't stop. He needed to get it down, to remember, to keep the facts in check. When he finished, he reread the notes. The page looked cold, emotionless, but it was true. Jacob closed the notebook, but the pain did not go away. He remembered Lily showing him her diary once, back in school. "Dad, I write down everything I think," she said, turning the pages. "It helps me figure things out." "You're like a writer," he smiled. "Maybe you'll publish a book." She laughed, pushing at his shoulder. Now he thought her journal had been a way of coping with the world. Maybe his writing would be the same a way to hold on to Lily, even if only on paper. Jacob stood up, put the notebook in a drawer, and went back into the living room. He picked up the photograph again and sat down on the couch. It was raining outside, drops pattering on the glass. He looked at Lily and thought about what he had learned. The speed, the road, the truck, they were all facts, but they didn't explain why she was gone. Jacob Wilson drove through the quiet streets of suburban Portland, heading to the house of Lily's best friend, Sarah. His blue pickup moved slowly, the wipers lazily sweeping the light rain off his windshield. It was early morning, 6 days after the accident that had taken the life of his 19-year-old daughter. Jacob gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He hadn't slept properly since that day, and the dark circles under his eyes betrayed his fatigue. He needed to talk to Sarah, find out what had happened to Lily before she got behind the wheel. Maybe it would help him understand why it had happened. He remembered Lily mentioning Sarah in their last conversation. It had been a normal morning. Jacob was drinking coffee at the kitchen table, checking work emails. Lily had come barreling into the kitchen, wearing a denim jacket and a backpack slung over her shoulder. "Dad, I'm going to see Sarah," she said, grabbing an apple from the table. "I'll be back for dinner." "Okay," he replied, without looking up from the screen. "Drive carefully." She nodded, smiled, and ran out. Jacob hadn't noticed anything odd at the time, not in her voice, not in her face. Now he replayed the moment over and over, looking for signs he'd missed. Why hadn't he asked how she was? Why hadn't he looked her in the eye? Guilt clenched his chest, and he hoped Sarah would give him some answers. Sarah's house was on a block with neat lawns and low fences. Jacob parked at the curb, turned off the engine, and sat for a minute, collecting his thoughts. Rain pounded the roof of the car, and he pulled up the hood of his jacket before getting out. He went to the door and rang the bell. He didn't have to wait long before Sarah, a short girl with short blonde hair, wearing a sweatshirt and jeans, answered the door. Her eyes were red, as if she had recently cried. "Mr. Wilson," she said quietly. "Come in." "Thank you, Sarah," Jacob said, his voice hoarse. He walked into the hallway, which smelled of vanilla candles. Sarah led him into the living room, where the sofa was covered with colorfully patterned pillows. They sat down, and Jacob took off his wet jacket, laying it over the back of a chair. I wanted to talk about Lily," he began, looking at his hands. "About that day. You saw her, right?" Sarah nodded, her fingers nervously fiddling with the hem of her sweatshirt. "Yes," she said. "She was at my place this morning. We were just chatting, watching a TV series. Nothing special." Jacob looked at her, trying to catch the details in her voice. "Was she okay?" he asked. "I mean, did she seem like herself?" Sarah looked away, her lips pressed together. She was silent, and Jacob felt a sense of unease building inside him. "Sarah, please," he said. "I need to know. If something was wrong, tell me." She sighed, finally looking up. She was upset, Sarah admitted, because of Dan, her boyfriend. They had a fight the night before. He said something hurtful, and Lily couldn't calm down. Jacob froze. He knew Lily was dating a guy named Dan, but she rarely talked about him. He remembered the time he caught her talking on the phone in her room. "Dan, you don't understand," Lily said, her voice shaking. "It's not that simple." Jacob knocked on the door then, and she said goodbye quickly, smiling at him as if nothing had happened. He didn't ask any questions, thinking it was her business. Now he wished he had intervened. "What's the fight?" he asked Sarah. "What did he say?" "Lily didn't go into detail," Sarah said. "She just said Dan accused her of spending too much time with her friends. He wanted her to spend more time with him. Lily was angry about it, but more than that, she was worried. She said she didn't want to lose him, but she didn't know how to fix it." Jacob gritted his teeth. He wanted to find this Dan and ask him how he dared to upset his daughter, but he was more angry with himself. Lily had been home that morning, and he hadn't even noticed that she was unwell. "Did she say anything else?" he asked. "Maybe about where she was going?" Sarah shook her head. "She said she was going home," she replied. "We were watching a TV series, and then she got up and said she had to go. I offered to stay, but she refused. She said she wanted some fresh air." Jacob closed his eyes, imagining Lily in her car, upset, heading toward Route 26. He remembered what Lieutenant Coulter had said. She was driving too fast. Maybe she wasn't in any condition to drive. Maybe if he'd been home, he'd have pulled her over. "I should have been with her," he said quietly, almost in a whisper. I was at work. I didn't even know she was upset. Mr. Wilson, it's not your fault, Sarah said, her voice shaking. Lily didn't mean to disturb you. She always said you were busy, and she didn't like to disturb you. The words hit harder than Jacob expected. He remembered Lily waiting for him to come home from work one day in high school to show him her drawing. Dad, look what I drew, she said, holding up a sheet of paper with a picture of a forest. Cool, he replied, glancing at her as he took off his coat. Tell me about it at dinner. I'm swamped with work right now. She nodded, but her smile faded. Jacob hadn't thought much of it at the time. Now he saw how many times he'd missed her signals, her attempts to get closer. Did she talk about me? He asked Sarah. Well, that day? You'll just be busy, Sarah replied. She wanted to cook dinner so you and Mrs. Wilson could rest. She was like that, you know, always thinking of others. Jacob nodded, his throat tightening. He stood up, feeling like he couldn't sit any longer. Sarah stood up too, her eyes shining with tears. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't know that this would happen. I should have insisted she stay. It's not your fault, Jacob said, though his voice was empty. He wanted to believe his words, but in his head he was thinking, it's my fault. He put on his jacket. Thank you, Sarah. If you remember anything else, call me, okay? Of course, she answered. Jacob left the house. The rain was still drizzling. He got into the car, but didn't drive the engine. Sarah's words echoed in his head. Lily was upset. Because of the fight, she needed some air. He imagined her behind the wheel, her eyes wet with tears on a slippery road. Why wasn't he home? Why hadn't he called her? He took Lily's keychain from his pocket, the star he'd found at the scene of the accident, and squeezed it in his hand. Emily Wilson sat at a wooden table in the cafe across from her school, staring at a cup of green tea. The light from the large windows reflected off the polished tabletop, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. It had been 7 days since her daughter Lily had died in a car accident. Emily was reconnecting with Matt, the gym teacher who had lost his wife 2 years earlier. Their first conversation in this same cafe 3 days ago had brought her unexpected relief, and when he had asked to meet again, she had agreed. She needed to escape the circle of pain that was tightening around her at home, even for an hour. Matt walked into the cafe, his dark hair slightly damp from the morning rain. He smiled when he saw Emily and sat down across from her, ordering a black coffee. He was wearing a sports jacket and jeans, and his calm confidence was a little reassuring to Emily. I'm glad you came, he said, stirring his coffee. How was your day? Emily shrugged, her fingers wrapping around the warm cup. As usual, she answered. Lessons, questions from students. I try to hold on, but everything reminds me of her. Matt nodded, his gaze intent. I understand, he said. When Kate died, I couldn't go into the gym without remembering her coming to my workouts. Everything felt like a part of her. Emily looked at him, feeling her eyes water. She remembered Lily coming into her classroom after school to chat. Mom, do you really like these old maps? Lily laughed, leafing through her history book. They're so dusty. It's not dust, it's history, Emily replied, feigning indignation. And don't touch my table. Lily rolled her eyes, but her smile was warm. Now the memory stung Emily, and she took a sip of tea to hide the tremor in her voice. I don't know how to cope, she confessed to Matt. At home, Jacob doesn't talk. He just sits there with her picture. I try to be there, but he pushes me away. Matt reached across the table and touched her fingers. His palm was warm, and Emily froze, but she didn't pull away. She felt the warmth, which contrasted with the coldness of her own thoughts. You don't have to cope alone, he said quietly. You're here, talking to me. That's something. Emily looked at his hand, still on hers. She wanted to pull away, to tell him it was wrong, but she couldn't. His touch was the first time in a week that she felt like someone actually saw her pain. Jacob, lost in his grief, seemed unreachable. She remembered their argument that morning when he'd accused her of escaping reality. "You just walk away like nothing happened," he said, his voice full of pain. "I'm not leaving," she said then. "I'm trying to live, Jacob. What about you?" He didn't answer, just turned away to look at Lily's photo. Now, sitting with Matt, Emily felt that her choice to meet him was not a betrayal, but a way to survive. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. "I needed to hear that." Matt squeezed her hand lightly before removing his own. "Whenever you want to talk, I'm here," he said. "No pressure." They continued talking, and Emily talked about Lily, her love of music, her dream of going to Europe after college. Matt listened, occasionally sharing stories of his own about his wife, how they were planning to start a small business. The conversation was light but deep, and Emily felt the tension in her chest ease a little. She hadn't noticed the time flying by until she glanced at her watch. It was 7 o'clock. "I have to go," she said, standing up. "I didn't think I'd be staying this long." "It's okay," Matt said, standing up too. "Maybe I'll see you again." "Maybe," Emily said, smiling weakly. She picked up her bag, and they walked out of the cafe. It was cool outside, and the rain had stopped, leaving puddles on the sidewalk. Matt walked her to the car and touched her shoulder lightly as he said goodbye. "Take care of yourself," he said. "You too," she said, getting into the car. As she drove away, relief mixed with guilt. She knew she should tell Jacob about the encounter, but the thought of his reaction, his silent judgment, or his outburst of anger kept her quiet. Jacob was sitting in the living room when Emily walked into the house. It was almost 8 o'clock. The lights were dim, except for a table lamp next to the couch where he kept a photo of Lily. His notebook was open on the coffee table, at the page with the accident. Emily set her bag by the door and took off her coat, trying to move quietly. She noticed Jacob glancing at her, but his face was still. "You're late," he said, his voice even but tired. "Yes," Emily answered, avoiding his gaze. "Stayed late at school. Lots of work." Jacob nodded but said nothing. He turned back to the photograph, his fingers brushing the glass frame. Emily felt a pang of guilt, but then she reminded herself that Jacob had pulled away. He hadn't asked her how her day was, hadn't offered to talk. She went into the kitchen to put the kettle on, but her thoughts were on Matt, his warm hand, his words. She didn't want to feel this, but his support was the only thing that kept her breathing. "Have you eaten?" Jacob asked from the living room, his voice barely audible. "Yes," Emily lied. "At school. And you?" "I don't want to," he replied. Emily nodded, though he couldn't see. She poured water into the kettle, turned it on, and stood there, watching the steam rise. Guilt was rising, but she pushed it down, telling herself she had done nothing wrong. She was simply talking to someone who understood her pain. Jacob couldn't blame her for that when he was locked in his own grief. When the kettle clicked, Emily poured herself some tea and walked into the living room. Jacob was still sitting with a photo, his gaze fixed on Lily. She wanted to say something, to ask how his day was, but the words stuck. Instead, she said, "I'm going to bed. I'm tired." "Okay," he replied without looking up. Emily turned and walked upstairs to their bedroom. She closed the door, feeling the silence of the house press down on her. Instead of sleeping in their shared bed, she grabbed a blanket and pillow and went into the spare room. It was cold, but she didn't want to go back. She needed space, not to think about Jacob, about his silence, about how she'd kept her encounter with Matt a secret. Lying on the narrow bed, Emily stared at the ceiling. She remembered Lily climbing into bed with her one night after a nightmare. "Mom, can I sleep here?" whispered Lily, who was then about 18 years old, 12. "Of course," Emily replied, hugging her. "Everything will be fine." Now Lily was gone, and Emily felt like nothing would be okay. She rolled over on her side, her eyes burning with the tears she was holding back. Guilt for meeting Matt mixed with justification. Jacob wasn't giving her support, so why couldn't she find it somewhere else? But the thought that she had hidden it was nagging. She closed her eyes, trying to sleep, but the image of Lily and the cold silence of the house held her captive. Tom Harris sat at the rickety desk in his small apartment on the outskirts of Portland, pen clutched over a sheet of paper. The light from an old lamp fell across the table, illuminating the blank page and a cup of cold coffee. It had been a week since his truck had collided with 19-year-old Lily Wilson's car on Highway 26. The accident was on his mind, and every night he woke to the sound of scraping metal that he might have imagined. Tom, a sturdy man in his 50s with short, graying hair, felt guilt tightening in his chest. He wanted to write a letter to her father, Jacob, to offer his condolences, but the words wouldn't come. Tom put down his pen and rubbed his face with his hands. He remembered that day, rainy, gray skies, and wet roads. He was driving his truck down Highway 26, returning from a delivery to a storage center. The radio was playing an old rock song, and he was tapping his fingers lightly on the steering wheel. The road was familiar. He had driven it hundreds of times. Suddenly, a blue car came zooming out of a side road, right in front of him. Tom slammed on the brakes, his foot pressing the pedal to the floor, but the truck was too heavy and the distance was too short. A second later, there was a bang, loud and sharp, like a gunshot. Lily's car was thrown off the road, smashing into a tree. "Damn, damn," he screamed then, turning off the engine. He jumped out of the cab, his boots sliding on the wet asphalt. Running to the car, he saw a girl lying motionless on the steering wheel. Her hair covered her face, blood running down her forehead. Tom screamed for help, but there was no one around, only the sound of rain. He dialed 911, his hands shaking as he spoke to the operator. Now, sitting at his desk, Tom closed his eyes, trying to push the image away. He hadn't known she was dead until the police told him later. Lieutenant Coulter, who had questioned him, had said Tom hadn't broken any rules, that the accident had been inevitable. But it didn't help. He'd seen her face every night, and the feeling that he could have done something wouldn't go away. Tom picked up his pen again and began to write. "Dear Mr. Wilson," he wrote in neat script. He paused, looking at the words. How could he say he was sorry? How could he explain that he hadn't meant to? He continued, "My name is Tom Harris, and I was the driver of the truck in the accident. I don't know how to say this, but I'm so sorry. I didn't have time to stop." His hand froze. The words seemed empty, too simple for what he was feeling. He imagined Jacob reading the letter, and fear gripped him. What if Lily's father blamed him? What if he wanted to meet and... Tom didn't know what he was more afraid of, anger or forgiveness. He remembered how his wife, Linda, who died of a heart attack 5 years ago, always told him to be honest. "Tom, if you make a mistake, admit it," she said one day when he was arguing with a colleague. "It's the only way to sleep soundly." "I didn't make a mistake," he replied then, laughing. "I'm right." She shook her head, smiling. Now Tom thought Linda would be right. He hadn't broken any rules, but he felt he had to do something. The letter might be a start, but he wasn't ready to send it. He folded the sheet of paper in half and put it in a drawer next to Linda's photograph. Her smile in the picture seemed reproachful, and he turned away. Tom stood up, walked to the window, and looked out. The rain had stopped, but the puddles glistened in the streetlights. He thought about Jacob Wilson. The police had given him the name of Lily's father when he'd asked who he could offer condolences to. Tom had looked up the Wilsons' address in the phone book. They lived in the suburbs, not far from his route. He could drive there, knock on the door, tell them in person. But the thought of standing in front of a father who'd lost his daughter terrified him. He imagined Jacob looking at him, his eyes filling with anger or pain. Tom didn't know if he could bear it. He returned to the desk, took out the letter, and read it again. "I'm so sorry" sounded sincere, but not sincere enough. He remembered his son, Mike, now living in California, calling him after the accident. "Dad, are you okay?" Mike asked, his voice worried. "I heard from my aunt about the accident." "Physically, yes," Tom answered. "But there was a girl, Mike. Young. She didn't survive." "It's not your fault," Mike said. "You didn't do it on purpose." "I know," Tom muttered, "but it doesn't help." Mike tried to calm him down, but his son's words didn't ease the burden. Tom thought that if he talked to Jacob, it might change something. Not for Lily, it was too late for her, but for himself. He wanted to tell him that he was awake, that he saw her car in his dreams, that he would give anything to turn back time. Tom sat down, picked up a clean sheet of paper, and began writing again. Mr. Wilson, I don't know how you're going to take this, but I have to say it. I was driving a truck. I didn't mean for this to happen. The rain, her car, it all happened too fast. He paused, his hand shaking. He imagined himself handing the letter to Jacob, reading it. But the fear that it would be misunderstood returned. He crumpled the sheet of paper and threw it in the trash. Enough, he said out loud to himself. His voice was hoarse in the empty apartment. Writing was useless. Words couldn't express what he felt. He needed to face Jacob, even if it was hard. He didn't know if Jacob would accept his condolences or slam the door, but Tom felt he had to try. It was the only thing that could ease the burden he was carrying. He stood up, took his jacket from the hanger, and checked his pockets, keys, wallet. Tomorrow, he will go to the Wilsons. He didn't know what he would say, but he decided to start with the truth. He hadn't had time to stop. He was sorry. He wanted Jacob to know it. Tom looked at the photo of Linda on the table. "Wish me luck," he muttered, touching the frame. He turned off the lamp and left the room, leaving the letter in the drawer. The silence of the apartment was behind him, but the guilt followed him like a shadow. It was cold outside, and Tom turned up the collar of his jacket. He got into his old sedan, started the engine, and sat there, looking out at the road. Tomorrow he would meet Jacob, and maybe that would give him a chance to start forgiving himself. But the fear of the conversation, of what he would see in Lily's father's eyes, was there. Tom pulled out onto the road, his headlights cutting through the darkness, but inside he felt only the weight of his burden. Jacob Wilson sat at the kitchen table in their suburban Portland home, flipping through a notebook filled with notes about Lily's accident. It had been a week since his 19-year-old daughter had died on Interstate 26, and each day brought a new wave of pain. Morning light streamed through the window, illuminating the wooden countertop where an empty coffee mug sat. Emily, his wife, had left for work early, leaving a note that read, "Back at 6. But yesterday she had been late, almost 8, and her explanation, held back at school, hadn't been convincing. Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He stood up to get some water and noticed Emily's bag left by the door in the hallway. She was always neat about putting things away, but lately she had been absent-minded. Jacob walked over to the bag, intending to take it into the living room, but noticed that the zipper was slightly open. A piece of paper was sticking out of the side pocket. He pulled it out and found a receipt from the cafe across the street from the school. The date was yesterday. The time was 6:47 p.m. The order was green tea and black coffee. Jacob frowned. Emily had said she had eaten at school, but the receipt said something else. He clutched the paper in his hand, feeling anxiety building in his chest. Jacob walked back into the kitchen, put the check on the table, and sat down. He remembered Emily coming home late the last few days, her short answers, her eyes avoiding him. He thought it was because of their fights, the way he had closed himself off in his grief. But now the check felt like evidence. He tried to convince himself it was nothing, that she might have met with a coworker, but his doubts grew. Jacob picked up his phone to call her, but he stopped. Instead, he decided to wait until she came back. Emily walked into the house around 7 o'clock, her coat damp from the rain. She set her bag by the door and took off her shoes, unaware that Jacob was watching her from the living room. He was sitting on the couch, holding a photo of Lily, but his gaze was fixed on his wife. "You're late again," he said, his voice calm but tense. Emily froze, then turned to face him. "Yes," she answered, adjusting her hair. "Homework, then checking notebooks." Time flew by. Jacob nodded, but his fingers tightened around the frame. He stood up, walked over to the kitchen table, and picked up the check, holding it out for her to see. "What is this?" he asked, his voice growing sharper. Emily looked at the check, her face turning pale. She opened her mouth, but couldn't find the words right away. "It's just a check," she said. "I stopped by the cafe after work." Nothing special. Nothing? Jacob repeated, his eyes narrowing. You said you ate at school. There's tea and coffee. Who were you with, Emily? She pressed her lips together, her hands falling to her sides. With a colleague, she replied. We were talking about work. It doesn't matter. Jacob felt anger rise in his chest. He wanted to believe her, but her evasiveness only added fuel to the fire. He stepped closer. It doesn't matter, he said. You're lying to me, Emily. I can see it on your face. Who is this colleague? Emily turned away, her fingers fiddling nervously with the sleeve of her blouse. At that moment, her phone, lying on the table in the hallway, blinked and the screen lit up. Jacob noticed it and, without thinking, grabbed the phone. Emily turned, her eyes widening. Put it down, she said sharply. It's mine. But Jacob had already seen the notification. A message from contact Matt, miss you. His hand shook, he looked at Emily, and his anger exploded. Who's Matt? He yelled, showing her the screen. Miss you? Is that your coworker? What the hell is going on, Emily? Who is Matt? Cheating or a misunderstanding? Like this if you also want to make sure that lies don't go unpunished. And subscribe so you don't miss out on the next exciting stories. Emily stepped towards him, trying to take the phone, but he pulled away. Let me explain, she said, her voice shaking. It's not what you think. Not that. Jacob threw the phone on the couch, his face turning red. Our daughter died, Emily, and you're running around cafes with some Matt who misses you? How could you? Emily closed her eyes, her shoulders slumping. She took a deep breath before speaking. Matt's a gym teacher, she said quietly. He lost his wife. We talked. We were just talking, Jacob. He understands how I feel. You don't do that. Does he understand? Jacob stepped closer, his voice shaking with rage. You're telling him about Lily? About us? And what? Am I a stranger? I'm her father. You're not talking to me, Emily screamed, her eyes filling with tears. You're sitting there with that picture, writing in your notebook, but you're not looking at me. I can't do this, Jacob. I need someone who listens. And you found him, he said, his voice cold. You betrayed me, Emily. You betrayed Lily. It's not betrayal, she said, wiping away tears. It's friendship. I didn't sleep with him. I didn't kiss him. We just talked. But you wouldn't understand that. Jacob shook his head, his hands clenched into fists. I don't want to hear it, he said. You lie to me, you hide. You run behind my back. I can't look at you. Emily looked at him, her face a mixture of pain and anger. Then what do you want? She asked. To sit here and be silent like you. I tried, Jacob. I tried to be with you, but you pushed me away. Go away, he said, his voice firm. I don't want you here. Go away. Emily froze, her eyes widening. Are you serious? She whispered. Are you kicking me out? Yes, he replied, turning away. Pack your things and leave. She stood looking at him, her breathing heavy. Then she nodded, as if making a decision. Okay, she said quietly, if that's what you want. Emily walked upstairs, her steps quick. Jacob remained in the living room, his heart pounding. He sat down on the couch, picked up Lily's photo, and looked at her smile. Guilt for his words mixed with anger. He remembered how Lily had once walked in on them arguing. Dad, Mom, that's enough, she said, standing in the doorway. You're like children. We'll figure it out, he said, but Lily just shook her head. Now he felt like he'd let her down again, but his anger at Emily was stronger. Half an hour later, Emily came down with a small suitcase. Her eyes were red, but she stood up straight. She stopped at the door of the living room. I'm going to Rachel's, she said, in Seattle. If you change your mind, you have my number. Jacob didn't answer, his eyes glued to the photograph. Emily waited a moment, then turned, picked up her bag, and walked out. The door slammed, and the house fell silent. Jacob heard her car start and drive away. He was left alone, holding the photograph of Lily, feeling their marriage, already fractured, finally fall apart. The anger still burned within him, but with it came an emptiness that he didn't know how to deal with. Emily Wilson sat on the couch in her sister Rachel's living room in Seattle, clutching a mug of herbal tea. Outside, a drizzle of rain, typical of a northwestern fall, patterned against the glass. It had been 2 days since she had left Portland after a fight with Jacob, her husband. Their 19-year-old daughter, Lily, had died in a car accident 10 days earlier, and their marriage, already strained by grief, had crumbled when Jacob found a receipt from the coffee shop and a text from Matt on her phone. Emily had come to Rachel's, hoping to find refuge, but loneliness had followed her. Rachel's living room was cozy, with a soft beige carpet and shelves lined with books. Emily looked at her mug, the tea steaming, but she didn't drink. Rachel, her older sister, came in with a plate of sandwiches and set it on the coffee table. Rachel was taller than Emily, with short dark hair and a calm gaze that always made Emily feel safe. "Eat," Rachel said, sitting down opposite her. "You look like you haven't eaten since yesterday." Emily smiled weakly, but took the sandwich only out of politeness. "Thank you," she said. "I'm just not hungry." Rachel looked at her, her eyes full of concern. Tell me what happened," she said. "You came here with one suitcase, you said you had a fight with Jacob, but you didn't explain. I'm not pushing, but you're my sister. I want to help." Emily set the mug down on the table, her fingers shaking. She didn't want to talk, but the silence was worse. She took a deep breath and began. "Jacob and we can't cope," she said. "After Lily, he shut himself off. He sits there with her picture, writing in his notebook about the accident. I've tried to be there, but he won't talk. And I can't do this, Rachel. I can't stay silent." Rachel nodded, her face remaining calm. "And you," she asked, "how are you coping?" Emily looked away, her cheeks flushed. She remembered Matt, the gym teacher she'd met at the coffee shop. His warm hand, his words that she wasn't alone. Now, after her fight with Jacob, she felt guilty about those encounters, but she still clung to them. "I met a man," she admitted. "His name is Matt. He works at a school. He lost his wife. We talked, just talked. He understands loss. It helped." Rachel raised her eyebrows, but didn't interrupt. "Jacob found out," Emily continued, her voice shaking. "He found the receipt from the cafe, saw the text from Matt. He thought that I was having an affair. I tried to explain that it wasn't true, that it was just friendship, but he wouldn't listen. He told me to leave." "And you came here," Rachel said, her voice even. Are you sure it was just friendship?" Emily looked at her sister, her eyes filling with tears. "Yes," she said. "I didn't kiss him. I didn't sleep with him. We just talked. But I didn't tell Jacob. I knew he wouldn't understand. And now I think maybe he's right. Maybe I betrayed him." Rachel reached out and squeezed her hand. "You didn't betray me," she said. "You were looking for a way to get over it. But hiding it was a mistake. Jacob is in agony, just like you. You both lost Lily." Emily nodded, wiping away her tears. She remembered how Lily had once caught her crying after an argument with Jacob. "Mom, what happened?" Lily asked, sitting down next to him. "Are you with Dad again?" "Just grown-up stuff," Emily replied, forcing a smile. "It'll be okay." Lily hugged her, and Emily felt her warmth. Now, without Lily, she felt empty. Talking to Rachel helped, but it didn't take the weight off. "What are you going to do?" Rachel asked. "Stay here?" "For a while," Emily said. "I got a temporary job at a school nearby. Substitute history teacher. I start tomorrow. I need something to do, or I'll go crazy." Rachel nodded, her gaze approving. "That's good," she said. "The work will help. And Jacob, will you talk to him?" Emily shook her head. "I don't know," she said. "He's so angry. I don't think he'll want to see me." She pulled her phone out of her pocket to check the time, and her eyes fell on Matt's name in her contacts. She remembered their last meeting, his words, "I'm here if you want to talk." She wanted to call, to hear his voice, but she hesitated. After her fight with Jacob, it didn't feel right. But the loneliness was stronger. She went into the kitchen, out of Rachel's hearing, and dialed Matt's number. The phone buzzed, but no one answered. Voicemail came on, and Emily hung up, feeling her heart tighten. She didn't know what she expected, but Matt's silence made her feel even more isolated. Back in the living room, Emily sat up and picked up her laptop from the coffee table. She opened a text document, deciding to write to Jacob. She needed to get her thoughts out there, even if she didn't send the letter. "Jacob," she began, "I don't know if you'll read this. I didn't mean to hurt you. Dating Matt wasn't what you think. I was just trying to breathe when everything was falling apart." She paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She remembered their last fight, his words, "Go away." They had been harsh, but she knew it was her fault for hiding the truth. "I miss Lily every second," she continued, "and I miss us, the way we were. I don't know how to fix it, but I'm sorry." Emily reread the text, her eyes stinging with tears. She wanted to send it, but the fear that Jacob would not respond, or would respond with anger, stopped her. She saved the document and closed her laptop. The letter would remain unsent, like her hopes for reconciliation. Rachel walked in with 2 mugs of tea and placed one in front of Emily. "Are you okay?" she asked, sitting down next to him. "No," Emily answered honestly. "I feel lost. Lily is gone, Jacob hates me, and I don't even know who I am anymore." "You're my sister," Rachel said, her voice firm. "And you're stronger than you think. You'll get through this, Em. One step at a time." Emily nodded, but didn't believe it. She remembered Lily coming to her one time in high school after failing a test. "Mom, I ruined everything," Lily said, her voice shaking. "I'm so stupid." "You're not stupid," Emily replied, hugging her. "You're just human. Mistakes are part of life." Emily now felt that her own mistakes, her secrecy, her running away from Jacob were too great. She sat looking out the window at the rain, feeling a loneliness she couldn't shake. Schoolwork, conversations with Rachel, even the missed call to Matt, they were all attempts to stay afloat, but without Lily and Jacob, she didn't know where to go. She clutched her mug, its warmth the only comfort in the cold emptiness that was her life now. Jacob Wilson sat on the couch in the living room of his suburban Portland home, holding a photograph of Lily. The light from the desk lamp illuminated her smiling face, but the silence in the house was deafening. It had been 10 days since his 19-year-old daughter had died in a car accident, and 3 days since Emily, his wife, had left for Seattle after an argument. Jacob was alone, and the emptiness of the house made him feel even worse. His notebook with notes from the accident lay on the coffee table, but he hadn't opened it today. He just stared at Lily, trying to remember her voice. The doorbell rang, breaking the silence. Jacob frowned. He wasn't expecting company. He put the photo down and walked to the door, his footsteps echoing in the hallway. When he opened the door, he saw a man in his 50s, stocky, with short graying hair and a tired look. He was wearing a dark jacket, slightly damp from the morning rain. "Mr. Wilson," the man asked, his voice low and slightly husky. "My name is Tom Harris. I was the truck driver in that accident with your daughter." Jacob froze, his hand tightening on the door handle. He knew Tom existed. Lieutenant Coulter had mentioned a driver, but he hadn't expected to see him on his doorstep. Anger flared in his chest, but he kept it in check. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice cold. Tom looked away, his fingers nervously fiddling with the hem of his jacket. "I wanted to talk," he said, "about what happened. I couldn't help but come. Please give me 5 minutes." Jacob started to slam the door, but something in Tom's eyes, pain mixed with fear, stopped him. He nodded and stepped back. "Come in," he said. Tom walked in, taking off his jacket and hanging it on the coat rack. They walked into the living room, and Jacob pointed to a chair. He sat down on the couch, next to the photo of Lily. Tom looked at the picture, his face tense. "She was beautiful," he said quietly. "I'm so sorry." "Tell me why you came," Jacob cut him off. His hands clenched into fists. Tom nodded, taking a deep breath. "I was on Highway 26, he began. "It was raining, the road was slippery. I was driving on the main road within the speed limit. Your daughter, her car came off the side road right in front of me. I slammed on the brakes, but a truck is heavy. It doesn't stop instantly. I didn't have time. The impact was hard. Her car went flying into a tree. Jacob listened, his heart pounding. He already knew the details from Coulter, but hearing it from the man who had been there was different. He imagined Lily behind the wheel, her hands on the wheel, trying to avoid a collision. The anger grew, and he couldn't hold it in. "You didn't make it in time," he said, his voice shaking. "You should have seen her. You should have stopped earlier. She died because of you." Tom hung his head and his shoulders slumped. "I know how it sounds," he said. "I replay that moment every day. I don't sleep, Mr. Wilson. I see her car. I hear the impact. If I could change anything, I would. But she showed up so suddenly, I never had a chance." Jacob stood up, his face turning red. "No chance?" he shouted. "She didn't have a chance. She was 19, Tom. She wanted to study, to travel, to live. And you just went on living, didn't you?" Tom looked up and Jacob saw tears in his eyes. "I don't live," he said quietly. "I go to work, I eat, I sleep, but that's not living. I lost my wife 5 years ago, and now this. I carry this with me. I came because I had to tell you. I don't apologize. I know I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I didn't want this." Jacob looked at him, his anger beginning to fade, replaced by pain. He could see that Tom was telling the truth. His shaking hands, his red eyes, betrayed the sincerity. Jacob sat up, his breathing heavy. He remembered what Coulter had said. The driver had not broken the rules. He remembered Lily's note, "Daddy, be careful." Maybe she was responsible, too, for driving too fast. The thought was unbearable, but it made him look at Tom differently. "You talked to the police," Jacob said, his voice quieter. "They said you weren't guilty." "They said," Tom nodded, "but it doesn't change how I feel. I wanted to meet you so you could hear it from me. I don't know if it would help, but I couldn't just sit there and say nothing." Jacob nodded, his gaze falling on the photo of Lily. He remembered how she had once, as a child, fallen off her bike and cried. "Dad, it's my fault," she sobbed. "I was driving too fast." "Mistakes happen," he replied, hugging her. "The main thing is that you're safe." Now she was not whole, and Jacob felt that the mistakes hers, Tom's had added up to a tragedy. He looked at Tom. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "I wanted to hate you, but I see that you are suffering too." Tom nodded, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "Thank you for listening," he said. "I didn't expect you to understand, but I hoped you would." He stood up, picked up his jacket, and walked to the door. Jacob walked him out, and Tom turned around on the threshold. "If you want to talk more, I'll leave my number," he said. Jacob nodded but didn't answer. Tom left and Jacob closed the door, returning to the living room. He sat down, picking up Lily's photo. The conversation with Tom had left him empty, but the anger was gone. He realized that blaming Tom was taking the easy way out. The truth was harder, and it hurt more. Later that day, Jacob walked around the house, thinking about the future. The house felt strange without Emily and Lily. He thought about selling it, moving away, starting over. He walked into Lily's room, where her books and clothes still lay untouched. The scent of her perfume hung in the air, and he couldn't imagine giving the place to anyone else. He remembered Lily sitting on her bed, listening to music. "Dad, this track is just fire," she said, holding out the earphone. "Listen." He smiled then, but refused. Now he regretted not having listened. The seminaries tied him to the house, and he decided not to sell it for now. Jacob walked back into the living room, opened his notebook, and wrote, "Tom Harris, not guilty, sincerely sorry." He felt lost, but talking to Tom had opened something new in him, a willingness to look forward, even if the steps were small. He looked at Lily's photo, and for the first time in a week, he felt like he could move on without forgetting her. Jacob Wilson stood at the mailbox in front of his home in suburban Portland, leafing through a stack of letters. The morning sun was breaking through the clouds, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves on his lawn. It had been 12 days since his 19-year-old daughter, Lily, had died in a car accident, and 5 days since Emily, his wife, had left for Seattle after an argument. The house was empty, and Jacob felt like he was drowning in silence. He kept a photo of Lily in the living room and wrote down the details of the accident in a notebook, but it didn't help. The pain was still there, and he didn't know how to move on. The creak of the gate made him look up. Marge, an elderly neighbor with gray hair pulled back into a bun, was walking up the path, carrying a plate covered with foil. Her face was kind, but her eyes were sympathetic. "Jacob," she said, stopping. "I brought a casserole. I thought you weren't up to cooking." "Thank you, Marge," he said, his voice quiet. He picked up the plate, its warmth palpable through the foil. "You shouldn't have bothered." "It's not a worry," she said, adjusting her glasses. "You're alone, and I know how hard it is. When my son died, I didn't want to get out of bed, but people helped." Jacob nodded, unsure of what to say. He knew Marge's son had died in an accident years ago, but they had never talked about it. "There's a support group at the community center," Marge continued. "On Tuesdays and Thursdays. People who've lost loved ones get together and talk. It helped me then. Maybe you should try it." Jacob looked at the letters in his hand, avoiding her gaze. He didn't want to share his pain with strangers. But the loneliness of the house was unbearable, and Marge's words hurt him. "I'll think about it," he said. "Thank you." Marge smiled and left, and Jacob went back into the house. He set the casserole on the kitchen table and sat down, looking at the letters. Electric bill, advertisement, nothing important. The thought of the support group kept coming back to him. He remembered Lily once trying to persuade him to go to a parent-teacher conference. "Dad, it's not scary there," she said, laughing. "Just people who want to help." "I don't like crowds," he said, but he went for her sake. Now he thought maybe it was worth a try for Lily's sake. That evening, Jacob parked his truck outside the community center. The building was low, with brick walls and large windows. It smelled of coffee and cleaning products. He found the room where the meeting was taking place. A sign on the door read, "Bereavement Support Group." Jacob hesitated, his hand hovering over the doorknob. He could have left, but the thought of returning to an empty house pushed him inside. There were about 10 chairs in a circle in the room, a coffee pot and a box of cookies on a table in the corner. 6 people were already sitting, talking quietly. The host, a woman in her 40s with a warm smile, noticed him. "Welcome," she said. "I'm Linda. Have a seat. We're about to begin." Jacob nodded and sat down in the empty chair, trying not to make eye contact with the others. The people ranged in age from a young woman with red eyes to an older man with a cane. He felt out of place, but Linda began the meeting and the tension eased slightly. "We're here to share if you're ready," Linda said. "No pressure. Who wants to start?" A young woman spoke of her brother who had died of an overdose. An older man spoke of his wife who had died of cancer. Jacob listened, his fingers fiddling nervously with the hem of his jacket. When Linda looked at him, he felt he had to speak. "My name is Jacob," he began, his voice hoarse. "My daughter, Lily, she was 19. She died in a car accident 2 weeks ago." He fell silent, looking at the floor. The room was quiet, and he felt the eyes of the others. It gave him the strength to continue. "She was. She loved music, volleyball, and always laughing," he said. "I was at work when it happened. She went to see a friend, and I didn't have time to say goodbye. I keep thinking I could have stopped her." His throat tightened, and he stopped. Linda nodded, her face full of understanding. "Thank you, Jacob," she said. "It's a big step to share. We all know this pain here." The man across from him spoke next, introducing himself as Mark. He was in his 40s, with short dark hair and a tired look in his eyes. He told of his son, Zach, who was 16 when he drowned while hiking. "I was with him," Mark said, his voice shaking. "I should have watched better. He swam too far for me to catch up. I can still hear him calling to me." Jacob looked at Mark, feeling his words echo in him. The guilt Mark was describing was familiar. After the meeting, as people began to leave, Jacob approached him at the table with coffee. "I'm Jacob," he said, holding out his hand. "What you said, I understand." Mark shook his hand, his grip firm. "Mark," he said, "I'm so sorry about your daughter. It, it never gets easier, does it?" "No," Jacob said. "I keep thinking I could be with her. I could do something." Mark nodded, pouring himself some coffee. "Me too," he said. "Zach was my only child. I thought I was protecting him, but I failed." They stood there in silence, and Jacob felt a strange sense of relief. Mark hadn't tried to console him with empty words, and that was honest. He remembered Lily sitting with him in the kitchen one day after a fight with a friend. "Dad, why can't people just tell the truth?" she asked, stirring her tea. "Because the truth sometimes hurts," he replied, "but it's necessary." Now Mark's truth, his pain, his loss was something Jacob could understand. He finished his coffee and looked at Mark. "Do you come here often?" he asked. "Every week," Mark said. "It helps. Not much, but enough to keep me sane. Want to meet up sometime? Have coffee, talk?" Jacob hesitated, but nodded. "Yes," he said. "That would be nice." They exchanged numbers, and Jacob left, feeling a lightness he hadn't expected. In the car, he looked at himself in the mirror. His eyes were red, but he didn't feel so alone. He remembered how Lily loved meeting people, how easy it was for her to connect. "Dad, you're too serious," she laughed. "Smile, talk to someone." Now he thought maybe she would be glad he tried. At home, he sat on the couch, picked up the photo of Lily, and looked at it. For the first time in 2 weeks, he felt a glimmer of purpose not to forget her, but to move forward. He opened his notebook and wrote, "Support group, Mark, lost son, understands." It was a small step, but it gave Jacob hope that he could find a way through the pain. Emily Wilson sat at a small table in the teacher's lounge at Seattle High School, holding a styrofoam cup of coffee. The window looked out onto the schoolyard, where children ran during recess, their voices muffled. It had been 2 weeks since her daughter, Lily, had died in a car accident, and a week since she had left Portland, leaving Jacob behind after an argument. Emily had found a temporary job in Seattle, substituting for a history teacher with her sister, Rachel, but even the job couldn't ease the loneliness that grew with each passing day. The coffee was bitter, but she drank it just to keep her hands occupied. Emily pulled out her phone to check the time, and her eyes fell on Matt's name in her contacts. Matt, the gym teacher at her school in Portland, was the only one who seemed to understand her pain after Lily's death. Their meetings at the coffee shop, his warm words, his hand on hers, gave her a comfort she couldn't find at home. But after the fight with Jacob, when he accused her of betraying her, Emily felt guilty about these meetings. She had called Matt a few days ago, but he hadn't answered, and that had left her hanging. Now she opened her messaging app, hoping to see something from him, but the chat was empty. Clara, another teacher Emily sometimes chatted with during breaks, walked into the room. Clara, a woman in her 30s with red hair, put her bag on the table and smiled. "Emily, did you hear?" she said, pouring herself some coffee. "About the new coach in Portland? Matt, I think. My friend works at that school. She says he's dating some librarian now." Emily froze, her fingers tightening around the cup. She forced herself to smile, but inside she felt a clench. "Matt?" she asked, trying to keep her voice even. "No, I didn't." "Yes," Clara continued, not noticing her tension. "My friend says they've been together for a couple of weeks. That's all everyone talks about." Emily nodded, her smile tight. She took a sip of coffee to hide the trembling in her hands. Matt was dating someone else. The thought hit her like a slap. She had imagined their connection as special, a friendship built on shared pain, but now it seemed an illusion. He hadn't answered her call or text, and she clung to his words, to his touch. She felt stupid, abandoned, and the loneliness she had tried to push away came crashing down on her with renewed vigor. "I need to get ready for class," she said, standing up. "See you later." Clara nodded, and Emily walked out into the hallway, her steps quick. She entered the empty classroom, closed the door, and leaned against the wall. Her eyes were burning, but she held back the tears. She remembered the last time she met Matt in the cafeteria, his words, "I'm here if you want to talk." Back then, she believed he was sincere, that their conversations were a lifeline. Now she saw that she had been just a moment in time for him, and he had moved on while she drowned in her grief. Emily pulled out her phone and opened Jacob's contact. She hadn't called him since she left, and his angry words, "Go away," still echoed in her head. But loneliness was stronger than fear. She needed to hear his voice, even if he rejected her. She pressed call, put the phone to her ear, and waited. The ringtones came one after another, but there was no answer. Voicemail picked up, and Emily hung up, her heart clenching. She imagined Jacob in their living room, sitting with Lily's photo, ignoring her call. He didn't want to hear from her, and that made her even more alone. She returned to Rachel's in the evening. Her sister was cooking dinner in the kitchen. The smell of fried onions filled the apartment, and the radio was playing soft jazz. Emily sat at the table, her bag still slung over her shoulder. "Rough day?" Rachel asked, stirring the pan. "You could say," Emily said, her voice weary. "I found out Matt was seeing someone. It's stupid, but I thought we were close." Rachel looked at her, her gaze soft. You were looking for support," she said. "That's not stupid, but maybe he's not the one for you." Emily nodded, but her sister's words didn't help. She remembered Lily sitting with her in the kitchen one day, telling her about her first crush. "Mom, he's so cool," Lily said, her eyes shining. "But I'm afraid he won't notice me." "If he doesn't notice, he's stupid," Emily replied, hugging her. "You deserve better." Emily now felt like she didn't deserve anything. She'd ruined her marriage, clung to the illusion of a connection with Matt, and lost Lily. She looked at Rachel. "I'm thinking of going back to Portland," she said, "to get my things. I left most of them there." Rachel put the frying pan on the stove and sat down opposite. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Are you ready to see Jacob?" Emily shook her head, her fingers fiddling with the strap of her bag. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I can't just sit here. I need to get my things, figure this out. Maybe this will help." "What if he wants to talk?" Rachel asked. "What do you say?" Emily shrugged, her eyes empty. "I don't know," she said. "I wrote him a letter, but I didn't send it. Maybe I'll say I'm sorry. Maybe he won't want to listen. But I have to try." Rachel nodded, her face serious. "Just be careful," she said. "Don't push yourself. You've been through enough." Emily smiled weakly, but inside she felt nothing but emptiness. She remembered how Lily had once come to her for advice after a fight with a friend. "Mom, I messed everything up," Lily said, her voice shaking. "How can I fix it?" "Sometimes you just have to take a step," Emily replied, "even if it's scary." Emily knew now that stepping back to Portland would be scary. She wasn't sure she was ready to face Jacob, to see his anger, or worse, his indifference. But she couldn't stay in Seattle, pretending she could start over when her life was still tied to home, to Lily, to Jacob. That night, Emily lay on the couch in Rachel's living room, staring at the ceiling. The rain still pounded the windows, and she thought about her unsent letter to Jacob. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she'd written. Now the words seemed as empty as her hopes for Matt. She closed her eyes, trying to remember Lily, her laughter, her hugs. But the image of her daughter was mixed with guilt, and Emily knew she had to go back to Portland, to pick up not just her things, but the part of herself she'd left behind. Jacob Wilson sat at a table in a small cafe in downtown Portland, across from Mark, a man he had met at a support group. Morning light poured through the large windows, reflecting off the wood floors, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. It had been 2 weeks since his 19-year-old daughter, Lily, had died in a car accident, and a week since Emily, his wife, had moved to Seattle after an argument. Jacob felt lost, but meeting Mark, who had lost his son, had given him a lingering sense of connection. They had agreed to grab coffee to talk outside of the group, and Jacob, holding his warm mug, hoped it would help. Mark, a man in his 40s with short dark hair, stirred his black coffee. His face was tired, but his eyes were understanding. "How are you holding up?" Mark asked, leaning back in his chair. "Since our meeting at the group." Jacob shrugged, his fingers fiddling with the rim of his mug. "I don't know," he said. "Sometimes it feels like I'm moving forward, and then it all comes back. I think about Lily all the time, about what I could have done differently." Mark nodded, his gaze serious. "I'm the same way," he said. "My Zach. I keep thinking about the argument we had before that trip. I told him not to go in the water, and he didn't listen. I blame myself, even though I know it won't bring him back." Jacob looked at the table, remembering his notebook, where he had written down the details of Lily's accident. He took it out of his bag and placed it in front of him, but did not open it. "I keep notes," he said. "Everything I know about that day. What the policeman said, what Lily's friend, the truck driver, said. I think it helps keep everything under control." Mark looked at the notebook, his eyebrows rising slightly. "That sounds like me," he said. "I kept a journal for the first few months after Zach. I wrote down what he said, what he did. But then I realized I wasn't writing about him. I was writing about my guilt." Jacob nodded, his fingers brushing the cover of the notebook. He opened it, flipping through the neatly written pages. Route 26, Slippery Road. Lily was upset. Each word was an attempt to understand, but now he felt like they were telling him not just about the accident, but about himself. "I was at work," he said quietly. "When Lily left that day, I was always at work. She would call, and I would hang up, thinking I'd call back later. I missed so many chances to be with her." He remembered Lily coming into his office one day after school holding a box of muffins. "Dad, I baked it at school," she said, smiling. "Try it." "I'm busy right now," he replied, without looking up from his computer. "Put it on the table, I'll eat it later." She nodded, but her smile faded. Jacob hadn't noticed it then, but it cut him now. He looked at Mark. "Have you ever felt like you weren't a good enough father?" he asked. Mark sighed, his gaze falling on the coffee. "Every day," he said. "I thought I had time with Zach, that I'd catch up later, and then he was gone. I'd give anything to just talk to him one more time." Jacob nodded, his throat tightening. He closed the notebook, feeling that the notes did not provide answers, but only highlighted his mistakes. He remembered Lily sitting with him in the backyard once, as a teenager. "Dad, you're always so busy," she said, looking at the stars. "When do you rest?" "When you grow up, I'll rest," he answered, laughing. She rolled her eyes, but hugged him. Now he wished he'd taken the day off, spent more time with her. Talking to Mark had made him see that he wasn't alone in his guilt, but that didn't ease the pain. They finished their coffee, and Jacob said goodbye to Mark, promising to see him again. He left the cafe, got into his truck, and decided to drive to Route 26, to the scene of the accident. He needed to do something to let go of some of the pain. He stopped at a flower shop, bought a bouquet of white roses, Lily's favorite flowers, and drove to the intersection. It wasn't raining, but the road still looked damp. Jacob parked on the side of the road, picked up the flowers, and walked over to the tree where Lily's car had stopped. The tire tracks on the asphalt had faded, but shards of glass still glittered in the grass. He stood by the tree, his fingers curling around the stems of the roses. "I'm sorry, Lily," he said, his voice shaking. "I should have been better. I should have listened to you." He laid the flowers at the base of the tree, their white petals standing out against the dark bark. He remembered Lily once bringing home a rose from the school garden. "Dad, look how beautiful it is," she said, putting it in a vase. "I want us to have a garden." "Maybe someday," he said, but he never found the time. Now the bouquet was his parting gesture, his way of saying he remembered. He stood by the tree, tears stinging his eyes, but he didn't wipe them away. This was his moment with Lily, and he didn't want to interrupt it. Back home, Jacob sat on the couch and picked up a photo of Lily. Her smile was so vivid he could almost hear her laugh. He pulled out his phone and dialed his sister, Kate, who lived in Oregon. They hadn't spoken since Lily's funeral, but he needed to hear a familiar voice. "Jacob," Kate replied, her voice surprised. "How are you?" "Not really," he admitted. I just wanted to talk." "I'm glad," she said. "What's going on? Are you alone?" Jacob told her about the support group, about Mark, about the flowers at the accident site. He mentioned the idea of selling the house, but his voice wavered. "I can't, Kate," he said. "Everything here reminds me of Lily. Her room, her things. If I sell it, it'll be like letting her go." "You won't let her go," Kate said. "She'll always be with you. But the house, it's your decision. Do what feels right." Jacob nodded, even though she couldn't see him. He looked at the picture of Lily and realized he wasn't ready to give up his home. It was where Lily had grown up, where they had laughed, fought, lived. He wanted to keep that connection, even if, and that meant living with pain. "I'll leave it," he said. "For now. Maybe later I'll decide, but not now." "That's a good choice," Kate said. "And Jacob, if you want to come, my door is open." "Thank you," he replied. "I'll think about it." Emily Wilson sat in her car in the parking lot of a downtown Portland diner, gripping the steering wheel. The morning sun glinted off the wet pavement, and the smell of rain still hung in the air. It had been 3 weeks since her 19-year-old daughter, Lily, had died in a car accident, and 10 days since she had left for Seattle after a fight with Jacob, her husband. Emily had returned to Portland to collect the rest of her things and sign the divorce papers. Her heart pounded as she thought about seeing Jacob. She wasn't sure if she was ready to see him, but she knew she needed to close this chapter. Emily got out of the car, picked up her bag with documents, and entered the cafe. Inside, it smelled of freshly brewed coffee and pastries, and soft light poured through the large windows. Jacob was already sitting at a table in the corner, a mug of black coffee in front of him. His face was tired, the dark circles under his eyes had become deeper, but his gaze was calmer than during their last argument. He looked up, noticing her, and nodded slightly. Emily came over and sat down opposite him, placing her bag on the chair next to him. "Hello," she said, her voice quiet. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "Hi," Jacob replied, his tone even. Are you okay?" Emily shrugged, her fingers fiddling with the strap of her bag. "Something like that," she said. "And you?" "Same here," he said, looking at the coffee. "Let's get started, okay?" Emily nodded and pulled out a folder of papers. She opened it, laying the papers on the table. They were divorce forms prepared by the lawyer she had hired in Seattle. She slid them toward Jacob, along with a pen. "It's simple," she said. "We sign, and the lawyer sends them to court. The division of property. I don't want to complicate things. The house is yours, I'll only take my things." Jacob picked up the papers, his fingers lingering on the first page. He didn't read, just stared, as if the words might change. Emily waited, feeling the silence between them grow heavy. She remembered their last fight, his anger when he found a text from Matt, "I miss you." Then he'd kicked her out, and she'd left. Now, sitting here, she felt guilty, but also relieved that they could finish this without yelling. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said suddenly, her voice shaking. I have to apologize, Jacob. For Matt, for keeping it a secret. I didn't sleep with him, but I was wrong not to tell you." Jacob looked up, his face tense but not angry. He placed the papers on the table and sighed. "I know," he said. "You said it was friendship. I didn't want to believe it. It was easier for me to blame you than to look at myself." Emily looked at him, surprised by his words. She expected anger, but his tone was different, tired, but sincere. "What do you mean?" she asked. Jacob leaned back in his chair, his fingers touching his mug. "I was distant," he said. "After Lily, I closed myself off. I sat with her picture, writing in my notebook, but I didn't talk to you. You tried, and I pushed you away. It's my fault, Emily. I wasn't there for you when you needed me." Emily felt her eyes water. She remembered trying to talk to him in the first days after the accident, him looking past her, holding up a picture of Lily. "I wanted to be there," she said, "but you never gave me a chance. I felt invisible." "I know," Jacob said, his voice quiet. "And I'm sorry. I didn't see your pain, only my own. It was wrong." They fell silent, and Emily looked at the table where the papers were. She remembered Lily, their daughter, who always tried to make peace between them after their quarrels. "Mom, Dad, you're like children," Lily said one day, standing in the kitchen doorway. "Just talk." "We'll figure it out," Emily had said, but Lily had just shaken her head. Emily now wished she'd listened. She looked at Jacob. "We were both wrong," she said. "I sought comfort from Matt because I couldn't find him at home, but I should have been honest. And you should have given me a chance." Jacob nodded, his gaze falling to the papers. "We failed," he said. "Lily, she held us together. Without her, we're lost." Emily wiped away her tears, her fingers shaking. "I think about her all the time," she said. "The way she laughed, the way she argued with me about books. I don't know how to live without her." "Me too," Jacob said. "I was at the scene of the accident. I left flowers there. I talked to her, apologized for not being a better father. I worked too much. I missed her." Emily looked at him. Her heart sank. She remembered how Lily would come to her with drawings, with stories, and she was often busy checking notebooks. "Me too," she said. "I thought we had time, that I could catch up. Now I regret every moment I didn't listen to her." They sat in silence, sharing the pain of loss. Emily felt like this was the first honest conversation they had had in a long time. She picked up a pen and signed her part of the paperwork, then pushed it toward Jacob. "This is the end, right?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Jacob picked up the pen, his hand hovering over the paper. He looked at Emily, his eyes red. "Yes," he said, "but I don't want us to hate each other. Lily wouldn't want that." Emily nodded, her lips twitching into a weak smile. "She would have scolded us," she said. "She would have told us to stop being stupid." Jacob smiled faintly, for the first time in weeks. He signed the papers, his handwriting uneven but determined. He slid them back toward Emily. "I don't hate you," he said. "I was angry, but I understand why you were looking for someone. I didn't give you what you were looking for." "Thank you," Emily said, "for saying that. I I hope you find a way to move on with your life." "You too," he replied. "You were always stronger than me." Emily shook her head, but didn't argue. She put the papers in a folder and stood up, picking up her bag. Jacob stood up too, and they looked at each other as if saying goodbye not only to their marriage, but to their shared pain. "Take care, Jacob," she said. "And you, Emily," he replied. She turned and walked out of the cafe, her steps slow. It was cool outside, and she turned up the collar of her coat. As she got into the car, she looked out the window at the cafe, where Jacob was still sitting, staring at his mug. Emily felt a mixture of relief and sadness. They had parted without rancor, and that was right, but there was an emptiness. She started the car and drove to their house to get her things, knowing that Lily would always be with her, even if she and Jacob had gone their separate ways. Jacob Wilson stood in the backyard of his suburban Portland home, holding a shovel. The May sun was soft, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves on the trees. It had been a month since his 19-year-old daughter, Lily, had died in a car accident, and 2 weeks since he and Emily, his ex-wife, had signed divorce papers. The house was quiet without them, but Jacob found ways to fill the void. Today, he decided to plant a rose bush in Lily's memory. White roses were her favorite, and he wanted something living to remind him of her. He was digging a hole in the corner of the yard where Lily liked to sit with a book. The ground was soft from a recent rain, and the shovel went into the soil easily. Jacob remembered how Lily had once tried to help him with the garden as a teenager. "Dad, it's so hard," she said, wiping the sweat from her forehead. "Why can't I just buy flowers?" "Because growing them yourself is different," he replied, laughing. "You'll understand when you see them bloom." She rolled her eyes but kept digging. Now Jacob wished they had planted that garden. This rose bush was his way of making up for lost time. He lowered the sapling into the hole, covered the roots with soil, and watered it with a watering can. The white buds were already beginning to open, and he hoped they would be in full bloom by summer. He stepped back, looking at the bush, and whispered, "This is for you, Lily." Jacob walked back into the living room, where a photograph of her lay on the couch. He picked up the frame, her smile as bright as the day the picture was taken in the park. The pain of her loss was still there, but it had become quieter, like a scar that no longer bleeds. He found solace in the support group he attended twice a week. Talking to people who had lost loved ones, especially Mark, whose son had died, helped him feel like he wasn't alone. At the last meeting, he shared the story of the rose bush. "I planted it yesterday," he told the group, his voice calm. "Lily loved roses. It's like she's still here." "It's beautiful, Jacob," Linda, the group leader, replied. "Things like that help keep them close." Mark, who was sitting opposite, nodded. "I did the same thing," he said. "I planted an oak tree for Zach. It grows, and I feel like he sees." Jacob smiled, feeling connected to others for the first time in a long time, not just to Lily. The group had become his anchor, a place where he could talk about his daughter without fear of judgment. Last week, Jacob started a new job as a logistics manager for a local company. It was a different position from his previous one, with endless meetings and overtime, but a more relaxed one with a clear schedule. He decided he didn't want to go back to a life where work took up all his time. He remembered Lily complaining about how busy he was. "Dad, you're always on the phone," she said one night at dinner. "Can we just not have it for once?" "It's work," he said, but put the phone down. He knew now that he should have done this more often. The new job gave him stability and time for himself, for the memory of Lily. In Seattle, Emily sat in an art studio classroom, holding a brush over a sheet of paper. The room was bright, with large windows overlooking the city. The smell of paint and the sounds of other students' quiet conversations filled the space. Emily had signed up for the art class a week ago, looking for a purpose to help her move forward. After her divorce from Jacob and the realization that her connection with Matt was an illusion, she felt lost. The art she had loved in her youth had become a way to find herself. The teacher, a woman with long gray hair, walked past and looked at her sketch, a sketch of a rose. "Good start, Emily," she said. "You have a sense of line. What inspired it?" Emily looked at the drawing, her fingers tightening around her brush. "My daughter," she answered quietly. "She loved roses." The teacher nodded without asking questions and moved on. Emily continued drawing, remembering Lily. She often thought about her, especially about the moments when they were close. One day, Lily found her old sketchbook. "Mom, did you draw this?" she asked, leafing through the pages. "Why did you quit?" "Life," Emily replied, smiling. "But maybe I'll come back to it." Now she was back, and every stroke was dedicated to Lily. The courses gave her a purpose, a way to express the pain and love she carried inside. She lived with Rachel, her sister, and worked at the school, but art became her personal space, where she could be honest with herself. Emily remembered her last meeting with Jacob at the coffee shop, when they had signed the divorce papers. They had talked about Lily, admitting their mistakes, her secrecy, his distance. They had parted without rancor, and that had given her peace, but it had not lifted the emptiness. She thought of Jacob sometimes, hoping he had found his way. She did not call him out of respect for their separate lives, but the memory of Lily bound them together forever. In Portland, Jacob returned to the yard to check on the rose bush. He watered it, making sure the soil was moist. He remembered Lily once, as a child, trying to grow a flower in a pot. "Dad, it's not growing," she complained, looking at the withered stem. "It takes time," he replied, helping her water, "and love." Now he gave it to his bush, and it was his way of caring for Lily. He went back into the house, picked up her picture, and sat on the couch. The pain of losing her was still there, but it had softened, like a scar that reminds but doesn't hurt. The support group, the new job, the rose bush, they were all steps forward, small but steady. In Seattle, Emily finished class and walked out of the studio, carrying her sketch. It was chilly outside, and she turned up the collar of her coat. She looked at the rose drawing, thinking of Lily. The memory of her daughter was with her in every brushstroke, every day. Art classes and schoolwork helped her build a new life, one step at a time, with quiet fortitude. Jacob and Emily lived apart. Their paths diverged, but Lily remained with them. They carried her in their hearts, in a rose bush, in drawings, in memories. Their shared loss was indelible, but it was softened by becoming part of their new lives. They were learning to live again without forgetting, and this was their quiet victory. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.